Good morning. Welcome back. Let's continue our discussion of the Age of Imperialism with what was going on in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Okay, Southeast Asia, if you remember when we started talking about the Age of Exploration, the Portuguese and the Dutch did reach here back in the 15 and 1600s, but really up until the 1800s, most of these places were independent of Western control. This, however, has always been an important area culturally and commercially because it is between India and China. So there's a lot of trade that goes back and forth there, and this was a desirable place. And of course, the Industrial Revolution and then the impetus of nationalism and imperialism changed all of this because they needed the resources, they needed the trade routes. And so by the late 1800s, this whole area was practically occupied by Westerners. We've already mentioned that what's now Indonesia, the Dutch East Indies, have been under control of the Dutch since the 1600s. It was even more solidified by the 19th century. Burma and the Malay Peninsula, which run in between what's now Bangladesh and Thailand. This came under British control by the late 1800s, and particularly important for the British was control of the island city of Singapore at the end of the Malay Peninsula. Very important shipping routes between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. The French come in and occupy what's now the countries of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. This area was called Indochina, sometimes French Indochina, and the French maintained control there till the 1950s. Thailand is the exception to the rule in this area because it was independent. Their rulers saw what was going on. They steered a route to remain neutral, particularly with the British and the French. And it actually turned out to be in the British and the French best interest that Thailand, or Siam as it was known then, stayed neutral because it served as a buffer zone between Burma, which was a British territory, and French Indochina. It was a buffer. But they did set out to modernize, and under King Mongkut, they made a lot of advances and became able to maintain their independence through their organization and military power. In the Pacific, you have three different groups of islands: Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. The Pacific is a very, very large body of water, and so these are island groups scattered throughout the Pacific. These always were important ports of call for sailors because it is a big ocean, and these were places that they could stop and resupply. A lot of these islands are rich with resources. They're either great places to grow sugar, nickel deposits are there, and guano, which is bird excrement, was used for fertilizer and also for ammunition, for gunpowder. And of course, with these countries having large navies and merchant fleets, they were coal powered at this time period. These were very key places to be able to refuel ships. These islands were rapidly taken over. Tahiti became a French colony in the 19th century. The Samoan Islands were sort of divided between the United States, Britain, and Germany. Later, the United States took over the German part, and this caused some bad blood, which says we're leading into World War I. That's part of the reason why there was some tension there. At the end of the Spanish-American War, we annexed Hawaii. Previously, in the 1880s, the sugar planters there overthrew the monarchy, Queen Liliuokalani, and basically wanted the United States to annex them, and we did take them over in 1898. The Philippines we gained as a result of defeating the Spanish in the Spanish-American War. The Filipinos really fully expected to be granted their independence, just like the Cubans were, and they didn't get this, and so they rose up in rebellion against American authority. And it's a very unknown war that we fought between 1899 and 1901. Hundreds of thousands of Filipinos died, and tens of thousands of American soldiers. Even here in Okeechobee, there's a mention of this briefly in the war monument in the middle of the downtown. Eventually, we did grant the Philippines their independence in the 1940s. Australia had been settled in the 1770s. Um, the indigenous native people there are called the Kuris, or sometimes the Aborigines. Kuri is actually the preferred term now. These people were rapidly displaced by European migration. Initially, it was as a penal colony, a place where they sent prisoners, but later, a lot of immigrants coming from different places settled there. And because largely it was settled by white people, by 1901, they were granted self rule. And the same thing is going on in New Zealand. Massive numbers of people coming from Britain. The indigenous people there were called the Maoris. By the 1870s, 1880s, these people had pretty much been displaced. And just like Australia, they were granted self rule and eventually have dominion status. So they're an independent country, but they're part of the British Commonwealth, these countries that still maintain connections and ties culturally with Great Britain. You don't really see the Pacific Islands with this map, but you can see where Burma is located, and then at the end of the Malay Peninsula, you see the island nation of Singapore. You see Siam is an independent nation between Burma and French Indochina. You have Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. You can see that the Dutch control the Indies here, and that the United States is in control over the Philippines.